Hi everyone, welcome back to ADEX Pixel Expo and also to the one-day digital launch of British High Commissioner's Malaysian Nature Tours event. I hope you do enjoy the last session that discusses on the business case for biodiversity and also ecosystem services. So today, right now, the session that we will be delving into brings a wider global, regional, and also local high-level perspectives to nature protection. And I'd like to introduce to you the moderator for this session. He's none other than Paul Rose, explorer, broadcaster, expedition, leader, National Geographic Pristine Seas.
Great. Thank you very much, Nora.
Without any further ado.
Thank you. Well, thanks very much, Nora, and everybody who puts this whole session together. Good evening to you, and good morning, good afternoon. We have no idea where you're all joining us from or what time zone even. So what a delight that is, and it's great to be with you. In these extraordinary times brought on by the COVID pandemic, there's no better time to focus on nature. And let's face it, thank heavens we have the scientists have brought us this vaccine, but we know that the long-term vaccine against future pandemics is to re-establish our values with nature. So we need to protect what we have. We need to restore what's been damaged, and we need to reset our values. And there's no better way than to discuss that than with the panel that I join today. And I wonder if I could ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves so you know who we are today and what we're going to do.
Would you like to give us the order?
Sure, why not? Come on, Glenn.
Thank you, and good morning, good evening to everybody around the world. I'm calling from UK, but I am Senior Advisor to WWF Malaysia, based in Sabah, Kota Kinabalu, and I will be talking about the Sabah Landscape Program, trying to bring together different strands of conservation and sustainable development. I started my career in Sabah. I won't say how long ago, but it was 1979. So it's a pleasure really to reflect back on changes over time and be with this group. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you. Welcome, Glenn. Anybody?
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Shah Reza. I'm the director of the Perak State Parks, and we look after protected area in Perak, the most famous being Royal Bloom State Park. I started my career over 23 years ago with WWF and has been with, WWF taught me a lot, and has been with conservation ever since, directly or indirectly. So managing protected area, today I shall share some of our experience on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Shah. Welcome.
Okay, I'm Sunita. I'm the founder of Climate Governance Malaysia. It was established in May last year, and it's been a real roller coaster ride ever since. We are the local country chapter of a World Economic Forum initiative to increase awareness of climate risks on boards of directors. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Thanks, Sunita. My name's Harry Jonas. I'm an international lawyer, and I'm also based in Sabah, Malaysia. Looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah, hello again. I'm Ejra. I'm from Borneo Marine Research Institute. I am a researcher in the institute. Currently I am a deputy director for academic and international in the institute.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. So now you know who's joining you today, and thank you for joining us. And to get us started, we have an 8-minute video from His Excellency Ken O'Flaherty, who is the UK government's COP26 regional ambassador to Asia Pacific and South Asia. So this is a great start for us. So over to you, Ken, with your recorded video. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Ken O'Flaherty. I have the honour to be the UK's COP26 Regional Ambassador for the Asia Pacific region. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon to address this webinar organised by my colleagues in the British High Commission in Kuala Lumpur in partnership with WWF Malaysia. I'm very pleased to see such a great assembly of experts as speakers and panellists here today, and I'm sure this will allow a stimulating and well-informed session later. Ladies and gentlemen, 2021 will be a super year for both climate change and biodiversity. Leaders from across the world will travel to China and the UK next year to make progress at the COP15 Biodiversity and the COP26 Climate Conferences, two major conferences held within a 6-month interval. Delivering successful outcomes on nature is a top priority for the UK government and many other countries, including Malaysia, which is such a nature-rich country. We want these global events next year to mark a clear step forward in global efforts to protect nature in the widest context. We must meet our twin objectives of protecting biodiversity and tackling climate change, as well as lowering both our ecological and our carbon footprints. The world remains in the grip of COVID-19, which has dominated the attention of governments over the last 9 months. But it's now time to look forward to how we emerge from the pandemic through an inclusive, green and resilient recovery. We're now rightly focused on caring and curing, but in our response we also need to consider nature and its role in climate mitigation and resilience. Our collective recovery needs strong roots in a greener and more resilient global economy. Natural systems are on the front line of the fight against climate change. They're directly impacted by climate change, and they also provide us with vital tools to help us adapt to rising temperatures and to lock up and store carbon. Our land and ocean are under threat from climate change, but they can also contribute to the solutions. And that's why nature-based solutions is a core theme of COP26. If we're to meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement, we clearly need a full-scale transition of our energy systems. And we also need a change in the way we use the land and the ocean. Agriculture, forestry and land use contribute 23% of global greenhouse gas emissions, but our land and coastal marine ecosystems could provide up to 1/3 of cost-effective ways to tackle climate change. Ecosystems are also under threat from climate change, impacting the well-being and the resilience of the hundreds of millions of people whose livelihoods depend on farming and fisheries. This risks undermining economic development and pushing further millions of people into food insecurity and poverty. In order to tackle these issues, we need a concerted global effort. The prize for doing so will be enormous. In economic terms, the benefits of a global transition to low-emission, sustainable land use and food systems could be huge, over $500 billion in business opportunities by 2030 and over $1 trillion in hidden costs for climate mitigation, resilience, food and nutrition security and economic development, and for the sustainability of the natural systems that underpin all this. Malaysia is the 12th most mega-diverse hotspot country in the world. It's home to some of the world's oldest tropical rainforests that are over 1 million years old. They extend from coastal plains to mountainous areas, including inland waters such as lakes and rivers. The Malayan tiger, Malayan tapir, orangutan, Borneo pygmy elephant and proboscis monkey are some globally endangered and also iconic species that occupy these terrestrial natural landscapes. The global community are awed by these living species that traverse your forests. Healthy forests and oceans are critical for sustaining life, eliminating poverty and promoting prosperity. Worldwide nature-based economic value is estimated at $125 trillion, according to WWF's Living Planet Index 2018. Nature-based solutions are also harnessing our energy needs via wind, sun, plant byproducts, wave and tidal movements. We need to amplify and scale up some of the nature-based solutions that we have innovated across the world, including in Malaysia. We need to build more good and impactful stories and not lose hope in nature providing the solutions we need to survive. So we ask our partners, you, to work with us, to encourage enhanced and ambitious political commitment to adopting nature-based solutions in policies and in programmes, to commit to tangible actions to address climate change and biodiversity loss through a nature-based solutions action pledge, building on the Nature-Based Solutions Manifesto launched at the UN Climate Action Summit in 2019. To sign up to the COP26 Just Rural Transition campaign or take specific actions to cut agricultural emissions and reduce the impact of agriculture on carbon-rich ecosystems, such as tropical forests, whilst investing in sustainable production and building new markets for sustainably grown produce. To scale up private and public financial support for nature-based solutions that support livelihoods, strengthen resilience and deliver carbon savings. And to champion and drive forward the protection of marine ecosystems to improve the ocean's resilience and support the restoration of critical habitats such as coral reefs, mangroves and seagrass beds. A transition towards a more sustainable food system and a renewed and scaled up effort to protect and restore ecosystems will require a whole of society effort. This needs to include the national government, local authorities, communities, farmers, scientists, conservationists, business and young people. The UK is ready to be bold and ambitious in partnership with all of you ahead of what we hope will be a pivotal COP15 in Kunming, China and COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. Thank you all very much for your support and for your engagement. My colleagues and I look forward to working with you all in the months ahead. Thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you very much for your kind words there, Ken. And now we get the opportunity to hear from each of our panelists a position statement to sort of begin to answer the big questions. You know, how do we really protect nature in the light of climate change? How do we really bring everything together so it feels like action? I'm really hoping that this session is like all of the good virtual sessions that we've learned so much about, that when we're finished, it won't be a thing that you just pass by with a good cup of tea and let it wash over you, but it feels like action. And this is the time to do it. So to get us started, I'd very much like to introduce my friend, Dr. Glyn Davis from WWF.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. And we can get going with the my presentation. So can everyone see that? Okay, so I wanted to talk about Sabah Landscapes Program and share some of the thinking behind that, and to take Paul's request to try and look at the link between policy and practice. So in terms of a position statement, I think we need to look larger than protected areas and units of agricultural production. They're often considered separately from each other. And unless we bring those together and integrate them, I think we will be tripping ourselves up. Policy statements made for agricultural subsidies have huge impacts on biodiversity, and activities in protected areas need to take account of the ecosystem services they contribute elsewhere. But central planning, and as we all know, and I was a civil servant for a while, joined up government is a critical part of trying to make conservation and sustainable development come together so we deliver the sustainable development goals. So we've developed a thought, an idea called Living Landscapes, and it has three pillars: protect, produce, and restore. And looking at bigger scale, we want to integrate those three pillars. So that, my position is, if we don't integrate them and have a narrative that allows protection, production, and restoration to be combined, we will not succeed, or rather we will do it rather slowly, which is not an option for us. So Sabah, most people are from Malaysia, so they know where Sabah is, But just so that you're clear, it's the green, I hope you can see my cursor, northern part of Borneo here. And roughly it exports palm oil, 1 million tons to China, about 1 million tons to India, about 1 million tons to Europe, and then various amounts to other markets in Southeast Asia. We know that oil palm has many issues, whether this is labor standards or the clearance of rainforest, community impacts, and of course, haze from fires which go well beyond the production area. So what's the policy context that we are looking at? Firstly, Malaysia is committed to keeping 50% of its land area as forest. This is a huge contribution both for biodiversity and for forest carbon. Sabah has gone one step further because it has authority over managing its land and has a policy commitment for 30% of totally protected areas. Second very important thing, since palm oil is such a huge user of land, it occupies about 1/5 of Sabah, is that the Malaysian government has set a sustainable production certification requirement for all palm oil growers and an intention not to expand further with palm oil plantations, mostly because the most suitable land has been taken up. Sabah has gone a step further and it wants to have by 2025 a RSPO, internationally certified production of all its palm oil. So really the Sabah Landscapes program is trying to say, how can we best serve those policy objectives of certified production of palm oil and protected areas? And here you can see a map of Sabah. The dark green is an orange, and pale blue are the 26% of Sabah that is so far totally protected areas. The pale green represents production forests for timber, and then the white, mostly in the eastern lowlands, is palm oil. And the three pillars, just so we clarify, protect includes orangutans, elephants, and other wildlife. Produce sustainable palm oil, certified, and then restore where we've overshot, and particularly where we have fragmentation of forests, that we look to rejoin those fragments through restoration, replanting. And Paul, I'll stop there because that's the big picture position. And later on, we'll talk about some of the practical things on the ground.
Glyn, thank you very much. What a great perspective to get us started with. And it was terrific that it's Sabre focused and ambitious targets. And I do believe that ambitious targets motivate people. They particularly vote, and they motivate those of us who vote. They motivate people who buy things, and therefore it motivates leaders, political and business, to make smart decisions. So what a terrific start to set the scene. Thank you very much, Glyn. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce my new friend, Shah. And Shah, can I ask you for your position statement, please?
Okay, let me just share the screen. All right, share. All right, sorry. Let me get this right. Okay. So this is Royal Bloom from the air. Okay, because of the shortage of time, I'm just going to put through proposition on today's talk. Basically, looking at how we communicate ecological systems, its importance, linking nature to climate change. Because often when we talk about climate change, we mostly talk about brown issues. We talk about the carbon footprint, we talk about recycling, we talk about brown issues, but linking nature to climate change is something I think we have failed a little bit. So I'm going to focus on our experience in sharing on how we share green issues, nature to climate change. Okay, the second thing that I will be touching upon is how do we have an inclusion of the local community on the ground to protect biodiversity loss. You know, this is looking into what we discussed previously, which is bringing COP15 biodiversity and COP26 climate change into the perspective of today's session. Yeah. So basically, those are my two premises that I shall discuss today. Before we go into that, I'll just introduce the state parks. Okay, so this introduction to us. We operate only in the state of Perak, and within the Perak state parks, we have 3 state parks. The most famous is Royal Belum, which is 117,000 square kilometers. But we do have our conservation islands. We do have a state park, which is Pulau Sembilan, which is a marine conservation island, both terrestrial and water. And then we have a lowland, a small but significant lowland protected area in Kinta Nature Park. Also within the preview of the Perak State Park is the Kinta Valley Geopark. And next year, we'll be taking management of the Lenggong UNESCO World Heritage Site. On that point, Royal Belum is preparing their dossier for us to be a natural heritage site for UNESCO. Okay, just to give a perspective so that people understand, I'm going to discuss on Royal Belum. So basically, this is a map. On the left is the map of Peninsula. Again, as Dr. Glenn has shown on Sabah, the dark greens are the protected area. The green are the forest reserve and some state land, and the rest are open for business. So protected areas are very small indeed. So I agree with Dr. Glenn that we should look into a bigger definition, the larger than protected area definition of what we need to conserve. Royal Belum is right on top. As you can see, I don't know whether my cursor is there, is right on top of the Banjaran Titiwangsa or the Titiwangsa range, dark green, with the second largest protected area in the Peninsula Malaysia, the biggest being the National Park. But bear in mind, Taman Negara consists of 3 states. We are only 1 state, Perak. And what is significant I want to show here is that if you see on the right, the Royal Belum State Park connects to Thailand. We are on Thailand's border. We are connected to the Banglang National Park, Halabala Wildlife Sanctuary, and the no hunting zone in the middle between the two. And this gives a huge, almost 500,000 hectares of protected area. And below Royal Belum are all forest reserves. And being a contiguous forest, it is really an important place to protect. Okay, so again, I would just like to reiterate that my position today is to look into how the Perak State Parks has looked into these 2 main areas, which is communicating nature to climate change, communicating biodiversity loss to climate change, and inclusiveness of local community, especially the indigenous orang asli, into investing and buying into protecting the forest. You know, they have a long history of traditional protection, but their history, their tradition has been bombarded with new challenges that I will discuss on the second presentation I have. And lastly, I would just like to end that in whatever the state park is doing for the protection of flora, fauna, biodiversity, ecosystem, we must try to mainstream all the SDGs within our work plan and within our planning, so that we contribute, however significant or insignificant, to the global effort for sustainability. Thank you, Paul.
Wow, thank you so much, Shah. And I love that, because the thing with climate change is when we speak about climate change, it can feel a bit vague. Such a big issue, people don't know how to grip it. And you're absolutely right, sir, in the fact that surely one of the finest ways to understand climate change and feel that you're doing something about it is to connect with nature, because we all love nature. It doesn't matter how we do it, there's a way of connecting with nature, whether you're in an urban environment or out in the wild places. We all love and know how to connect to nature. So you're absolutely right. It's a brilliant message. So thank you very much, Shah, very much indeed. And it's a great pleasure now to introduce my new friend, Sunita. And Sunita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I just wanted to give a little bit of background as to how climate governance set up. At the end of 2018, the OECD had their usual biannual engagement with our local Securities Commission. And during this meeting, I met someone called Karina Litvak. And she pulled me aside and she said, you know what, in the few months' time, the World Economic Forum is going to come up with climate governance principles, and we want to promote this as country chapters all around the world. Would you do this? And so I said, well, I'm not sure about it, but I could take a look at it. And of course, naturally, for the next few months, I didn't do anything about it because climate governance was such a new concept. And I had no one to talk to about this. One thing led to another. And before I knew it, I had the UK Ambassador for Climate Change, His Excellency Nick Bridge, coming to Kuala Lumpur. The then Minister for Climate Change, YB Yobiin, said that she would officiate the launch of Climate Governance Malaysia. And so in May last year, like it or not, whether I was ready or not, I had to have this launch. And it was fantastic because we got so much support from the regulatory authorities, the Securities Commission, the Central Bank, the Stock Exchange, because they all recognize that capital markets needs to be prepared to have this very difficult conversation about climate risks. How are they increasing their climate resilience? What is their climate strategy? Is the board climate literate? And during the course of this engagement, which really was a World Economic Forum initiative, so this was a country chapter. We started engaging with, now there's over 20 other country chapters around the world. And every month we have an update about what everybody's doing, and we're planning cross-chapter collaborations as well. And so during the course of this engagement, as I'm advocating, me and my little team, the secretariat and the committee and the founders of directors who are passionate about this, as we're advocating to people, we're realizing that environmental sustainability and commercial sustainability are one and the same thing. As the co-founder is fond of saying, there's no planet B. We can't have a successful business on a dead planet. And so it's not just about measuring your carbon footprint. It's not just about ensuring you have adequate disclosure. It's also about mainstreaming the climate conversation and ensuring that everyone's fluent and literate in this new language where it's not just profits any longer. So I'm going to leave this for here, Paul, but looking forward to diving deep into this conversation.
Wow, fantastic, Sunita. And I've always had that dream that when a chief executive is standing in front of her board, she has in mind nature and the value of nature. And I always expected, when I've been with people who have been with me in the polar regions or in the deep sea, that they've gone back, and when those decisions are being made or guidance is being given to the board, it's this way or that way. And that little shift the right way can make an enormous difference. So I'm with you on your work, so thank you very much indeed. We're doing well on time, but we must move forward. But a quick note to those of you listening and watching, please do send in your questions. We're ready. We've got quite a lot already, but we're ready. We've got a good session at the end of all of our talks, and we're looking forward to your insights, questions, and advice. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Harry Jonas. Over to you, Harry.
Thank you very much. I want to begin with an Einstein quote. He said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking of the right question to ask, because then 5 minutes would suffice to answer that question. So since we're given 5 minutes, it felt appropriate. And the question I sort of set myself as I was reflecting on my work and the issues we're looking at today is this: which is the group that has thus far been least appreciated, but has got a disproportionately large amount to offer the twin biodiversity and climate crises? And that is, in my view, Indigenous peoples and local communities. So to give people on the call a bit of background, if you don't know so much about this issue, the sad history is that Indigenous peoples, local communities around the world have been marginalized and discriminated against, beginning during colonial times, when their treatment was, very, very bad, and in some places actually officially thought of as genocide. But since independence, as well, in many countries around the world, unfortunately, they weren't necessarily embraced by new national governments. They were considered, quote unquote, backward or anti-development, for example. And governmental and other agencies and companies' approaches was to basically either actively undermine their ways of life, and or to actively expropriate their lands to use them for agriculture and other things. So that's the bad background. There's more to it, obviously, but despite all of that, actually Indigenous peoples and local communities around the world have in many places endured and even thrived, often, as you'll hear now, in these biodiverse rich areas. So I've got a couple of statistics, not always the most interesting, but bear with me because they are quite profound numbers. There's about 1.5 billion Indigenous peoples and local communities living in areas important for biodiversity around the world. So that's a significant number of people living in these biodiversity rich areas. The coverage of that area is about 1/4 of the world's surface, just under 40 million square kilometers, talking about terrestrial surface there. And that intersects with about 40% of all areas important for biodiversity. So when you put all those things together from a biodiversity perspective and also from a climate perspective, this is a very, very important group of people. Now, you would think that conservationists would have been one of their greatest allies in time, but unfortunately, this has not been the case. And there is a core reason why. It's because of this. The Western approach to conservation has been one where we see nature as humans as being apart from each other, as opposed to being a part of each other. And again, the Western notion of protecting places was often meant removing humans from those areas. And this over the last century and already 2 square decades into this one has led to a fair amount of human rights abuses around the world, including a lot of protected areas being established on Indigenous peoples' lands. And so what you find is that Indigenous peoples have found themselves essentially caught between development on one hand, because they're not developing quote unquote fast enough, and conservation on the other that says, oh, well, these lands are so pristine, wouldn't it be good to further protect them? So Indigenous peoples and local communities or representatives of them have really done a very, very good job of fighting to have their voices heard in the context of the Convention on Biological Diversity that I follow most closely, and also UN Framework on Climate Change meetings. And I want to publicly salute them on this call. And so to conclude in this first section, to address biodiversity loss and climate change, we need to actively engage with indigenous peoples and local communities with respect and according to their internationally agreed rights. And put simply, where we don't do that, it represents a continuation of the mindset, laws, and policies that have put us in exactly this spot. But when we do that collectively, globally, we will progress. So that's my opening gambit. Thanks very much.
Wow, thank you very much, Harry. And what an insight. And it tells you something that we even are speaking about this issue today. It's the kind of thing that I think a lot of people who aren't working in conservation would just assume that the indigenous viewpoint and all of this would have been considered along the way. So it's a perfect time for us to consider this as we look to solutions in the light of climate change, that we don't forget that we can't just keep going on the same expected method. We need to shift gears. So Harry, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. And now it's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ejera. Thank you very much, EJ.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to share my slide. Oh. Is it sharing?
It is.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you, because I can see here. Okay, let me make. So this is seem very academic as usual, but today I'm going to share about the title, Managing Large Seascape in the Coral Triangle for Climate Resilient. First of all, for this first session, I would like to introduce the keyword of the title related with Coral Triangle. If you are from Sabah, you are familiar with this area. As you can see on the screen, CTI, Coral Triangle Initiative on Coral Reefs, Fisheries and Food Security, formed in 2009, almost more than 10 years ago. This is a multilateral partnership of 6 countries, as you can see here, the red line. Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Island, and finally Solomon Island. So this is actually a multilateral focusing on food security through sustainable management of marine natural resources. As we know, Coral Triangle is the highest marine diversity in the world. And for Malaysia, Sulu Sulawesi area is part of this Coral Triangle. So the main target, among the target, they have many targets, but recently highlighted that CTI should establish a regional marine protected area network within these 6 countries, especially for total conservation, and link with the marine protected area. Another thing is related with ecosystem approach to fisheries management in selected marine managed area, means MPA, and relate with climate change. So as mentioned earlier, where we are in CTI, so this is Sulu Sulawesi, share of 3 countries, Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. The Seascape Working Group in CTI, in the past they have 5 working group, and for Seascape, they identify this region as one of priority seascape. And and their action in there to protect marine habitat and establish marine protected area, and taking account the coastal community and also science as a part of procedure for its management. And there are book there on the top is an action plan. We can get it online. So there is a little bit of introduction of my talk today. So I pass to you, Paul. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much, EJ. I really like that. As you say, the ecosystem approach is very good. I always say that when we're speaking to fishermen about marine protected areas, we don't speak about marine protected areas, we speak about fish. And it's the way to do it. And there you are speaking about the whole community. And I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much, EJ. Well, I hope you all enjoyed the initial opening position statements from our panel. So now you know who we are and what our broad perspective is. Do please keep the questions coming. We'll take them after this next all panel discussion. We have a number of questions coming in. I've certainly got a bunch myself, and we are ready for any insights, comments, questions, or indeed any advice. At times like this, it's critical that we're all able to take advice. So now I have the opportunity now to invite the whole panel to discuss the single issue that you are probably all thinking about, and it is how best to protect nature in the light of climate change. So we've already heard how we can look at nature as a way to communicate climate change. We know that it's a perfect way for people to understand how their work could be in climate change, could be enough to make a difference. You know, that wonderful sense that every step in your normal life is a positive step towards climate change. And that's where I think of nature. But now we could perhaps turn it a little bit on its head and ask, how do we protect nature in light of climate change? And I invite the panel to either make a short opening statement, sort of a headline answer to that question, or indeed go directly into a cross-panel discussion, whichever you think. Over to you.
So, Paul, I've got a few thoughts from Sabah with just a few pictures, if I can contribute them to give an example of what we're thinking about and perhaps build a little on. Can you see my screen?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Paul, are we into our next 4 or 5 minutes now?
Yes, we are, Shah. Yes, and this can be independent presentations and then followed by a discussion, or indeed feel free to comment on people's discussion as it's going on. So I hope the feeling now is that we're all in all round a nice, big, comfortable table with good tea somewhere beautiful, maybe in the sense of being in a tent somewhere in a beautiful forest, sharing tea with the rain outside and having a good discussion. How's that for a scenario?
Sounds excellent.
Excellent.
Is my screen sharing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So just, Paul, to pick up on your question there, looking at, I had those 3 pillars of protect, produce, and restore. I think looking at this kind of rainforest shot here from Sabah, it's important to remember that the forest there, unlogged forest, which is a photograph on the left here, holds about 200 plus tons of above ground carbon per hectare. And the next very important thing is to bear in mind that the logged forests of Sabah, which is a very large area, they are still very important. They're not pristine, but they have been exploited for timber since the 1960s. But they're still very valuable and important. And sustainable forest management and reduced impact logging are really important tools so that we can manage our natural resources for benefit and still have climate and biodiversity in mind. So in log forests, you know, you have orangutans, you have a number of these very beautiful forest species that I'm showing on the screen here. Then when you move to the protection zone, if you look on the right, you can see a Mungaris tree. It gives you a sense of what the forest would have looked like if it was still there, rather than a mature oil palm plantation beneath. So that's what we've lost. And we're now trying to rebalance the books. And as you can see on the left-hand side, you know, obviously that's all that forest is gone, but it is now agricultural land. And we really need to focus on how to look after the labor forces, to have good labor standards, to have sensible use of chemicals, minimize them if possible, to make sure that they have a decent living wage. So I think we need to incorporate that into our thinking in the produce space. And here you'll see Dr. Cheryl Cheer on the left here, Looking Elephant. We're also taking up more and more land for development and agriculture, and therefore the conflicts with wildlife are increasing. And we need to really come up with smart ways of people living with wildlife in these agricultural landscapes. So I think that's another thing we need to translate back onto the ground. And finally, you see this picture on the left here is a bit of a mess compared to the forest I just showed you. How do we restore critical areas? On the right here, you can see we need a corridor to link two patches of forest to the north and the south. So I think by combining all of those in a spatial plan, which is signed off by local stakeholders and then approved by the government, is an important step so that different voices are heard with these different perspectives, because we must stop talking as though we can achieve one thing on one piece of land. You can't achieve the production of oil palm and keep rainforest carbon. They're not compatible. So it's getting the balance right between those various strategies to land it on the ground. Thank you very much. Just to bring it down a bit. You're on mute, Paul.
Thanks, Glyn. Terrific insight. Comments from the panelists?
Yeah, welcome.
Nothing at the moment. Okay, no problem. Let's go next. Shah, can we have your sort of general answer? What can we do to protect nature in light of climate change?
I think it's all in the messaging, Paul. You know, when we talk about the two C's, which both the biodiversity and climate, there seems to be a disjointed message in how we present nature. You know, everybody know the trees take stock up carbon and all that. Everybody knows that, you know, trees produce oxygen, but unless that is made relevant to their daily life, the message would not hit them. And in my next slide, in my next 3-4 minutes, I will try to share how we try to do this in messaging out Royal Bloom State Park. If you allow me, Paul. All right, thank you. Okay, let me just go here. All right, I've covered this. Okay, so let me just get rid of some stuff up here. Sorry. As you can see, I've been staying in the forest too long, right? And getting tech unsavvy. Because there's just too many things on my screen. All right, okay. So communicating ecological ecosystem and its importance in a way that society generally understands. Where is that? Okay, as I've mentioned, Royal Bloom is right on top here. We are totally protected. and we are far away from people. There's hardly anybody that lives there except for the indigenous people, which I will come to later. Okay, so how we communicate is, we used to talk about flora and fauna all the time. Hang on. Sorry guys, I'm really poor at this. I can't see myself and I'm getting a bit disjointed here.
Please don't worry, Charles. We can see your screen very well, so please don't worry. It's good for us.
Okay, so all right. So what we've done is, we've always spoken about how important the forest is. We've already spoken about how important the animals are, but really, people, especially in the urban setting, they don't care. So what we've told them is, look at the forest in a different perspective. The Perak River, the second longest river in Peninsular Malaysia, starts in Royal Belum Forest. Okay, that one river powers 4 dams. It powers one river. There are 4 hydropower dams across that river, and it produces more than 22% of the state energy. And for the state of Perak, we are a net exporter of energy. Okay, so that is how important and how powerful that one river is. Second, we tell them that the Sungai Perak, or the Perak River, is one of the biggest source of raw water in the country. You know, Perak is again a next exporter of raw water. And in between Royal Belum State Park to the end of the river going into the sea, there are over 12, there's over a dozen big, huge water intake, you know, and this water has been able to generate so much income for the state of Perak, and it has helped to be distributed to other states in Penang and Selangor and elsewhere, you know. Thirdly, the Perak River, the single Perak River, provides hundreds of kilometers of drainage and, more importantly, irrigation system to the farmers in Perak State, you know. So one single river has this amount of power and this amount of contribution. But what we need to tell people is, where do the river gets its water? Where does the water all start? And the answer is, it all starts in the rainforest, you know, in the Belum rainforest. And if you do not protect the rainforest, all this asset, all this hydropower, all this raw power, all this plantation and farms will be out of commission. So if you do not look after the forest, which produce the water for the Perak River, we are doomed. So in the end, the statement is, the Perak River is an asset. It is a strategic asset, not only for the state, but for the country. So this is how we try to link, you know, protection of ecological systems to the general public. And once they know how important the forest is, providing all this, not only natural stuff, but also economic benefits to them, then they will have a different perspective of nature. Okay, that's I'll go on to the next slide, and I will finish my presentation after this. Hello, I can't go. Okay, so I want to talk about one of the biggest threat to biodiversity loss in the country and also in Perak, which is wildlife poaching and trafficking. As you know, trafficking is one of the 4 biggest syndicated problem globally, and we have that in Royal Bloom. So in order to overcome that, one of the big strategies that we have is actually ensuring that community-based conservation being propounded in all our activities. And at the heart of our protection is looking at the Orang Asli, or the indigenous people. We are lucky in Royal Bloom that the Jahai group, the Jahai people, lives inside and within the protected area. And the next step is, how do we take them and empower them and get their buy-in to help us in terms of protecting biodiversity. The problem is the local indigenous people has never been a threat to biodiversity loss or to poaching. Whatever they consume for themselves or their family. But the problem now is third party, people from outside, giving them money, corrupting them to consume beyond their needs and to actually help in the wildlife poaching. So we need to reverse this sad state of effect of people from outside corrupting them in their sustainable livelihood or their sustainable living. You know, we have really corrupted them inside there. Okay, so what we have formed in Royal Bloom is the 100% Jahai Orang Asli patrol unit called the Mendrak. And the Mendrak is well trained by my rangers, by the state park rangers, to do patrolling and protection. And the way that we approach the community for this wildlife patrolling is to ensure that they don't only patrol for themselves, but they patrol for their village, for their community. For every team member that goes out, they are paid, and they are paid accordingly. But a percentage of payment is made to the village. So what the individual earn by going for patrolling is theirs, which is roughly 8 to 1,000 ringgit for 15 days or 14 days work a month. And each of them contribute back, not each of them contribute, there is an extra payment to the village for each and every one of them that participate in our patrolling. We have seen that by bringing them in, teaching them and training them to do patrolling and teaching them going on the ground on why we patrol, gives them a bigger sense of responsibility into their village. They themselves are now the advocates of protecting wildlife. And they now understand that they need to hunt for their own living only and not go beyond helping poachers outside. You know, I would love to explain more about our Mendrak patrol team, but unfortunately, this is really not the time because time is limited here. Okay, so they really help to strengthen our patrol team. They are well versed on why they do the patrolling. Okay, and as I mentioned last time, that everything that we do within Royal Bloom, we try to mainstream SDGs into it. And I'm proud to say, to various degree of success, we have covered 11 out of the 17 SDG within the Royal Bloom State Park. Okay, Paul, I'll stop there. Well, I think I've gone beyond what I should. Thank you.
Sure. I tell you, Shah, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got a bunch of comments and questions just from that session, but I loved it. I particularly liked your explanation of ecosystem services. And I was remembering back to the days working with Pavan Sukhdev. And do you remember TEEB, when, the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity, it was a very big thing, a discussion on the true value of how to work out the value of ecosystem services and the value of biodiversity. And your work with with the Jahai is just amazing. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on it. But if it's okay with the panel, we'll pass on to Sunita perspective on this. How do we protect nature in the light of climate change? Thank you very much, Shah. Over to you, Sunita.
Thank you, Paul. I have to admit that was such a compelling story that he shared with us, isn't it? I just love the perspective. And like you said, Paul, valuation of ecosystem services. There are many companies that are already starting to look into this. How do we actually value this and putting this into their balance sheet, into their financial statements? Because now because everything that human beings do lives off the environment. And so now this is a mechanism by which we can actually put that into the books. So when I'm giving some of my talks, especially to university students, I like to, pepper the talk with questions so that it becomes a bit more interactive and engaging. And one of the questions I like to ask them is, which is more valuable, Amazon the jungle or Amazon the company? And it's interesting because Amazon the company has recently become the most valuable company in the world by market capitalization. And of course, the owner is also one of the richest man in the world. And yet Amazon the jungle, which we all appreciate and value, doesn't have any value, monetary value to it until the trees are cut down. And then suddenly it'll pop up on someone's balance sheet. And then an actual amount, a quantifiable amount is attributed to the jungle. So in anticipation of that, some companies have started valuing ecosystem services. So of course it's more of an art rather than a science. It's undermined by so many assumptions. And of course it takes a long-term horizon to look at it. But there are some companies that are already trying to do this. And this is in recognition that everything we do is of the environment. And this other thing I wanted to share also, how do we protect nature, is that, like it or not, especially in Malaysia, logging is a source of income to quite a few stakeholders, not just the state, government, but also loggers, businessmen, and there are people whose livelihoods depend on this as well. And so, although it might be a market-driven solution, but carbon offset programs do bring money in to protect the natural ecosystem, the rainforest. And if it is well designed, especially if it has the relevant international certifications, then you can also ensure that multiple stakeholders are looked after. So like Shariza pointed out, the Aboriginal people, who are the natural guardians, aren't they, of this very important area of biodiversity. So a well-designed, a well-planned out carbon offset program would take all of this into account. It's still at nascent stages here, but there are a lot of conversations at the highest levels of governments and large organizations to come up with a carbon marketplace. And so this is a very important development that we need to have a continuing conversation about. So I'll leave this for right now, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sunita. Yes, it seems like a lifetime ago. I don't know about you, but this pandemic has given me a strange time shift. So I think back to January, and in January, I was at Davos for the week as a guest of WEF. And although that seems like a lifetime ago, it was this year. And I was so energized by the words about ESG investing, natural capital, and all the rest of it, in the fact that it is outperforming. And I love that sense of going between all of these sessions. And I'm no financial expert, but just understanding that, wow, this is good. It's offering good returns. It's safe. It's very desirable. And it just happens to be the right thing to do. Then surely that's a great way to run business, is when it feels right. It's easy, but guess what? It just happens to be the right thing to do. Well, thank you, Sunita. Really terrific input. We'll be back We better move forward. I'm looking at the time. And Harry, what's your take on this, please?
Thanks very much. I just wonder if from my opening statement, people think, this is the human rights guy. My first love is biodiversity. I'm an international environmental lawyer by training, and very much got into it for biodiversity reasons. It was interesting in my earlier part of my career that I really discovered the social side. And if I'm going to work to protect biodiversity, drawing on Shah's example, I wanted to work for people as well. And so I just wanted to give now a bit of a concrete example of how we're moving forwards with this. 2020 is actually a deadline for a 10-year plan on biodiversity, and countries are reporting, as you just heard from Dr. Glynn as well, their percentage coverage. So here we've got the global figures for you. Global protected areas coverage, terrestrial 15%, chasing a target of 17%, and 7.5% of oceans chasing a target of 10%. So those are some, we've really increased protected area coverage over the last 10 years, and those targets have really incentivized countries to do that. These protected areas, however, you'll probably have picked up from my presentation, are very much governed in the first instance by government agencies, and that there's a reason for that, because that's the paradigm that we've run. I have been working on developing an international law, a new designation that enables areas outside of protected areas that either will never become protected areas or can't become protected areas to be recognized for their biodiversity values. And just if you're wondering, well, why can't every area be a protected area? Not that many countries' laws allow for private and or indigenous peoples or local communities to govern, to be the governance authorities of protected areas. Maybe there's some shared management, but not the governance or full management of these areas. So what we've been working on is really represents a significant step forwards for the recognition of conservation occurring in these areas beyond or between, as you saw from Dr. Glynn's presentation as well, these connecting areas. Well, who governs those and how can they be recognized for their contributions? So here I just want to give you a little technicality, but it's a really important one. A protected area, when you use this phrase, this term protected areas, that we all know and love, what are we really talking about? We are talking about areas that are dedicated to conservation. Most normally they have a plan that says these are the biodiversity values and this is what we are trying to achieve in these areas. These are the species we want to protect. And so that makes a lot of sense. Of course, we have that kind of a framework. So what we've developed, for the sake of today, I'm going to call them conserved areas. There is a rather longer, rather boring international law phrase, but for the sake of today, conserved areas. These are areas, friends, that are outside of protected areas, exactly like the kind of, as I say, connecting area that Dr. Glynn put on screen, that are delivering the effective conservation of biodiversity. And the second part of that phrase there, regardless of their primary management objectives, all that means is they don't have to be dedicated for conservation. They can be used for a whole range of different things. And so here in Sabah, I'll give you two different examples. Here in Sabah, there may be areas that are protected for their ecosystem services. Protected for their ecosystem services, but they're delivering biodiversity benefits. Those places might not be protected areas. They could be conserved areas. They could be governed as well by all sorts of different communities governance authorities, government, private, indigenous. I'll give you one from the UK as well. These government-related plants are, very closed off spaces. You can't just go roaming on those kinds of areas, and all sorts of weird and wonderful biodiversity thrives in these kinds of areas. And so there was an endangered spider that was recently discovered in my home country, England, recently, in a very weird and wonderful place. But it's there because no one has gone and disturbed it, not because it's necessarily a protected area. And so I love this story. We've got these places they're beautiful, that are biodiverse, that are governed by this great diversity of people and organizations outside protected areas, connecting the landscape, connecting the seascape. So watch this space, because some of you on this call will also know that the world is currently negotiating a new 10-year plan that will be reported then in 2030. And just because we like things that rhyme, the percentage target we're looking for this time is 30%, 30 by 30. And that's a very, very ambitious and important target. And I am quite sure, mark my words, that a good amount of that advancement of areas that we report will actually be protected and conserved areas. So Paul, thanks again, and for hearing me out. Thanks.
Brilliant, Harry. I absolutely love that. I've always been a fan of these accidental protected areas. And as you say, you know, whether they're the verges on the side of a highway, or the verges on the side of railway tracks, or, you know, marine firing ranges. I have fond memories of diving when we closed, the British Navy closed down its bombing range up in Cape Wrath, northern Scotland, for a week so that we could dive in there for television. And it was quite something to, within the bombing range, which had been bombed for over 140 years by ever increasing powerful weapons, was more life than just outside it where they could fish.
Mm-hmm.
It's really quite something. Thanks, Harry. We'll be back. And to finish off our questions, of course, it's Dr. Ajira. So thank you very much. Over to you, please, EJ.
Dr. Ajira, I think maybe on mute.
Okay. Sorry again.
Thank you, La.
Yeah, I've been talking alone here. So yeah, I just said that thank you, Harry, for highlighted the importance of protected area, because now I'm going to share this slide related with work we done in Tun Mustapa Parks, the biggest marine protected area in Sabah, and we are working with the community. So I'm not going to read what I wrote here, but this is the picture here, involvement of the coastal community working on seagrass monitoring, and also provide data for climate change in line with the goal number 4 of CTI. And we know seagrass, when talking about seagrass, we know that seagrass is one of the biggest contributor in carbon sequestration from atmosphere. Okay, so how we do that? We involve community engagement and involvement. So we communicate with them, involve them. We are focus group, interview in the field, and they are also involved in any workshop related with conservation and awareness program. So this picture, how we communicate with people, and also sharing knowledge from both sides, from the community and also for us. And other than that, we are also involved community in the we are also involved community service with the coastal community, where this is as examples of the work we done. The student goes to their community and work with them, know them, and not only the old people, the adult people, but also the children. and most of the program related with conservation and awareness program. So other than that, we are some of the project. We invite the community to the university and join us using some of our equipments and teach them how to collect data in the field. As you can see here, this is one of the program where most of them are participation from the community. What we get from the community out of that, this community are helping us in monitoring, give some information about their site. So in our study, we choose 2 areas in Kampung Kimihang. No one of you know the place, I think, but I just mentioned it here. For those from Sabah, probably they know in Kampung Kimihang and also Kampung Bawang Jamal. So what we get information from them, as you can see here, this is a ghost net. For them, this is normal for them. And they are recycling the net. It's very long, more than 50, I think, meters long. And they use this for their fence or recycle as a rope. But for us, we see this as, exploitation of marine resources in the open sea. They're using just a long net, for certain marine fish target. And once stranded like this, it will affecting turtles and other animals, marine mammals, other whatever, marine life, bigger marine life because of the mesh size. And also, of course, contribute to pollution. Data collection, this is our work in the field. We cannot go to work, to the field alone. And this community are helping us. In the past, we invite them to UMS to how to collect data from in the field and also use some of the equipments. And now they are here helping us. We don't know how to use the boat or even the motor. We don't have small what we call this one, small boat that can go other places, shallow area. But this community are willing to help us. Okay, so another thing, this is our recent pictures collected from the field, where provided by the community. We due to the pandemic COVID-19, we are unable to go to the field, but we need data. So what we get from them is a picture, is the seagrass that's supposed to be monitored. We go there for to set up transect and collect their what we call that the distribution, and also their the condition of the seagrass. But this is picture that given by the community, share with us, that the seagrass covered by thick algae. And this one picture here, algae stranded on the beach, and the smell and also the color of the beach totally changed, that we are unable to assess during the pandemic and only occurred during certain time of the year. And of course, this community also helping us to monitor turtles in their area. Okay, so along the way, we also communicate this community, because we have already create, how to say, good connection, and we are able to get the timeline, what happened to their area in terms for climate change, monitor, how to say, adaptation. And this is the data that we collected. It's not yet finalized, but at least we have some background of changes in the area. And also, we managed to get seasonal change in terms of, sorry, I can't say what is that. Marine resources by month. So this is a data we collected. Actually, there are more explanation, but just to show what we have at the moment. And as a summary, we found out that this coastal community provide data for us. And of course, the data need to support by science. And the scientific finding should be shared with the local government and other stakeholders for policies. And all this baseline data that collected in the field should be included in the climate change adaptation and mitigation measure. And hopefully, this information can be used for management of Sulawesi seascape and also Coral Triangle in general. So hopefully that this, whatever we get here, can contribute to climate change mitigation and increase resilience to not only to coastal ecosystem but also coastal community. And based on the SDG, the data collected are responding to SDG 13, climate change action, and also life below the sea. So a little bit from me. Thank you. Hopefully I'm not taking too long. Okay, thanks.
Well, EJ, thanks so much. And I really did sense during your talk there, I really did sense we were in a tent. You know that feeling, it's hot and sticky and it's raining and I could hear you through the noise of the rain. And I just wonder how long it will be before, instead of us here in our places and discussing the effects of and the leadership coming from indigenous populations, how long it will be before we join them in a big virtual event where they are there in the tent and we are being invited to join them to share true global leadership and effective work in nature. I think that will be just fantastic. So thank you very much to everybody listening for questions. We've got a big stack of them here. And I think we've really set a great scene here for this could be another 2-hour discussion. I'm particularly keen to get some cross discussion amongst the panelists and for you who have joined us. So thank you very much for the questions. I've got one that came in a bit earlier. I'd love to get it out now. And the question is to all of the panelists: how do we value nature as a strategic asset and incorporate into business and government decision making? So the panel.
Okay, can I say something, Glenn, just before you chip in?
Of course.
No, sorry, I thought you were about to say something.
No, go.
Okay, my take is this. I'm an economist by training. I ended up in the forest for whatever reason. But if you want to talk about big business and getting the message to big business, I think what Datin Sunita is doing is great, because it has to be at the board. It has to be at the board level. The board must understand how important a role they play in focusing and steering their company towards sustainability. I've been in private practice before. I've been in public listed company. When you are a CEO of a public listed company and the board sets you the direction and wants you to maximize profit and maximize return to shareholders, you have no choice. As a CEO, a responsible one, you will do everything to make sure shareholder return is maximized. But if shareholder return is number 4 or number 5 or number 6 in the agenda, Number one being sustainability, number two being gender equality, number three being non-exploitation of resources and people. All that are first in the company, and return to shareholder and maximizing profit is number five. Then the CEO, is easier for the CEO to work within a sustainable framework. It's all from the board. So board governance and board understanding of their role is so important, because the management downwards will only do put their planning and their work into what the board directs them to. If profit maximizing is that, then you can't blame them for doing it. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
I thought that was great, Shah. A complete reset of values. Yes, please. Over to you, Sunita next.
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. I mean, of course, we all live in a world which ideally not a single tree should be cut down. But the reality is that everything we do is of the environment, the food we eat, the air, the water. And of course, by the time it becomes a corporation, then you're taking even more things out of so much more extraction out of the environment. For example, the pivot to electric vehicles, that's a huge amount of rare earth minerals that are going to be needed for the millions of electric vehicles as we pivot away from internal combustion engines. So the question of how do we value nature as a strategic asset? How do we incorporate this into business and government's decision making? And I do believe that we need to start with engagement to try and mainstream the climate conversation. Because when everybody's on the same page, then you can start to slowly turn this aircraft carrier. But it's not going to work if a handful of people are sprinting ahead far away in the distance, because it really needs all of society to be on board. And so one of the things we're doing at Climate Governance Malaysia is initiating conversations with government. We're dealing with the Ministry of Environment, but you can see that this needs an all of government approach as well. We can't have anybody being left back and not understanding or sabotaging or not being fully aware of the implications, because the sort of language that's being used is that climate change impacts are going to be far-reaching in breadth and magnitude. They are uncertain and yet at the same time totally foreseeable. And this is what is known as the tragedy of the horizons, that by the time climate emergency becomes the defining matter for financial systems, it might be too late. So we need to act now. So it's incumbent on all of us to start engaging, whether with businesses, with governments, to keep this conversation going so that we can fully appreciate and understand. This is going to be iterative. There's no silver bullet here. This conversation is going to be a long-term conversation because there are going to be unintended consequences. And so we need to keep iterating. We need to keep coming back to the table again and saying, look, how do we do this better? How do we spend our money more wisely? We've got limited resources. We need to be able to manage this.
Brilliant. Can I come in on that?
Yes, Harry, or whoever.
Thank you so much, Jatin, Sunita. I love the tragedy of the horizons, the play on words there. And in the same vein, I just wanted to bring two things. You also mentioned OECD earlier. Recent study shows that actually the world's governments are investing $80 billion into protecting biodiversity, which sounds quite incredible. That's a huge amount of money which is being put into biodiversity protection. More than 500 billion is being directly invested in activities that lead to biodiversity loss. So when you look at that kind of mismatch, it's pretty obvious why we're moving in certain directions. And just to add to that, it was really interesting. President Barack Obama, when he was talking about the US and actually the world climbing out of the last economic meltdown, when he was reflecting on it, saying, because we were so pressured at that time, we made a mistake. And he said we used tomorrow's money, i.e. borrowing, to support yesterday's industries. I thought that was a really profound way of thinking about it. And again, what's happened this year to the world economy and people who've suffered economically through this. is terrible, but there is this opportunity for governments and, as you were all mentioning as well, the private sector to realign its values. Thanks very much.
Thanks, and to build on Datin's comments, in fact, all the comments, there's a sense of values, and we need to not lose that in the economics. Paul mentioned TEEB already. There was the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and I do recall a discussion on the Natural Capital Initiative in the UK. So you have production values, which you can give a dollar sign to, or ecosystem services you can give some values to. Datin already mentioned, we're looking for a price of carbon. There's no one standing in a market saying, okay, I'll buy your carbon, here it is, that will offset cutting it down and selling it for timber or taking the tigers or whatever. But there was a nice example in UK, and I just want to keep optimistic. So the government wanted to privatize and sell off government forests. Okay, no one did an assessment of what was the value of the water and so. And actually, the value of recreation is at least three times higher, if not more, than timber values in British woodlands. But they couldn't do it because the British public were outraged that those things should be sold, many of which were given to restore the nation after periods of war and so on and so forth. So let's keep the values as part of the conversation, because it's going to take a while for the economics to really catch up and change behavior. Thank you.
I agree with you, Dr. Glyn. It's actually a really complex conversation. And Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, she wrote an editorial in the Financial Times stating that a third of her country was underwater. And then she goes on to point that the G20 countries are responsible for 80% of total emissions, while the bottom 100 only accounts for 3.5%. And so we cannot successfully tackle the climate challenge without significant action from everyone. And it's important to keep this conversation going, because otherwise developed nations are going to be accused of outsourcing their carbon to producing nations, because they are really consumption nations, aren't they? They import what they are not producing. And so it's important, instead of saying, you should be in a, and I think the phrase is common but differentiated responsibilities. And this means everybody needs to be at the table talking about this. So it's not just about values of nature, but values about who should bear the cost. How do we innovatively work our way out of this conundrum? Human beings have done this many, many, many times before, but it requires all of us to come together and collaborate and communicate respectfully with each other.
Well, bravo. Thank you, Sunita. Well, it's time for final words from everybody. And thank you so much for joining us in our tent. I know the rain's been hard and it's been beating down, but I think I heard everybody, and I hope you enjoyed sheltering from the warm, beautiful tropical rain, and the sense of joining us in our tent has been a great feeling. We've got all the right people here to help give us guidance and a set of values for the future. This has been recorded, so you can find it online later. So I thank you all for joining us from wherever you are. And I thank all of the panelists for helping develop a new form of energy inside this forest tent. I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been absolutely brilliant. And I give the final words to you all. So who would like to start with the final words? The same order, Glyn?
Sure, I'll have a go. Thank you. So really to share that I think government and business have to work more closely together. Business always hate government interfering in their affairs, blah, blah, blah. Government want to take a longer view and have to balance all sorts of political processes. But the tools of certification for sustainable production and the platforms to say, look, there's a role for policy and regulations, as you said, Paul, at the beginning, which sets a direction and business says we want a level playing field. So please let's set positive directions for climate and nature. And then we need the tools to help that proceed. So I think that would be my first feeling from, the discussions. I think the second is one which Datin touched on, but has come up, is timescales. We're not going to get quick returns for investments we make now. Even on offsetting, you need to do the right thing first. You need to mitigate, you need to restore. And until you've done those things, you shouldn't offset, because it's just transferring damage from one place to another. So, everyone's got to just take a little bit longer about how we're going to get this right. As Harry says, there's communities to be involved who are not in this tent at the minute. As Dr. EJ pointed out to us, how do we get all this together? So really two things. Government and business, please work together. Give us a framework we can all contribute and use market forces, our preferred buying for the right things. And then look, we've got to take a bit longer time scale, and having KPIs and incentives for doing things quickly and quick profit, not going to get us there. Thank you.
Fantastic, Glyn. Thanks a lot. And Shah, final words, please.
Okay, a short one. I think it comes down to what you said earlier, Paul, which is values. I think we need to re-establish our values. Is the values are beyond Glenn, beyond economic numbers, and this is something that I saw moving. Some businesses are moving into, but it has stagnated for whatever reason, which is social enterprises. When social enterprise and social business, they have an agenda bigger than just profit, and that is something that would be a model of sustainability, because their agenda is beyond profitability. Maybe big businesses should also move towards a social enterprise rather than, and to do that, the shareholders must be communicated to properly, as Datin said, so that they understand that the shareholders of the company pressures the board, and the board also understand, and the board brings it down to management, which will hopefully do it sustainably. So values moving from strict profit to a more social enterprise kind of, so maybe the COVID pandemic teaches us to look into a more balanced a business, because the bottom line is, when it comes to naturally disasters, often the big enterprises loses the most.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll stop there. It's the
Thank
economist
you,
in me.
We could go all day. And Sunita, final words, please.
Yes, of course. So I didn't want anyone to get the impression that I had come up with the term tragedy of the horizons. Mark Carney gave this speech when he was the governor of Bank of England in 2015. And essentially what he said was, by the time climate emergency becomes the defining issue for financial stability, it might be too late. And so we need to act now. And there's this difference in time horizons. So what I would like to leave the listeners with is, let's think about what success would look like. We would like to have the climate conversation mainstreamed, isn't it? So that everybody understands this language, the value of our ecosystem, the urgency of the climate emergency. And for that, we're going to need language which is understandable and accurate, which all of society, and of course, all of government is included, needs to understand. And I personally think that this is going to include a pathway to mandatory. So whether it's pricing carbon, whether it's mandatory disclosure, I think this is all going to be inevitable. And so the key insight that we can take away today is that whether or not we succeed in delivering Paris is no longer just about decarbonizing the world's energy system. It is equally important to maintain our biodiversity. We need to transform the world's food system And we absolutely need to maintain the carbon sinks in our natural ecosystem. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Sunita. And quickly on to Harry, please.
Yeah, thanks. You know, when you look at all the biodiversity indicators, the best report, it's very bad news. But I remain an optimist. And the reason I remain optimistic is because of my local work here in Sabah. I'm fortunate enough to work with an organization here called Forever Sabah. And actually I work hand in hand as well with WWF Sabah on some marine issues. And it's really seeing that keeps me very, very optimistic about what's happening. So my message to those of you watching is that if you're ever scrolling through global news or watching news and it gets you down, find a local group, join a local group doing local environmental action, and I guarantee your spirits will soar.
Bravo, thank you very much. And it gives me great pleasure to, EJ, you have the final word from inside of our tent. So it's nearly stopped raining, so we can all hear you. So over to you, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'm scared running of time earlier. But anyway, all been said by other panelists. But a final word from me. Let's work together. Let's engage to increase resilience to climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much to all of you who joined. And, you know, I can feel it stopped raining now, so it's time for everybody to go outside and we'll clean up and have some more tea. Thanks very much for joining us, and we'll leave you with this video. Thank you.
Thank you,
Paul.
Thank you,
everyone.
colleagues.
Guys.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
It's not a time for a concept anymore. This is the time for a real action.
Together we can fight this.
喜爱 klar.
我准备好了。还没接受。
Thank you everyone for such a fantastic panel discussion, and especially to share it among the community of edX and also the rest and also the rest of the partners and stakeholders. So I just want to thank all the panelists, for example, Datin Sunita Rajakumar, Shah Reza Hussain, Dr. Ejria Saleh, Dr. Glyn Davis, and also Harry Jonas. But last but not least, of course, we'd like to send our greatest thanks to Paul Rose for moderating this session, definitely. All right, so just to have a quick update on what's happening next, we are gonna have a session from 8 p.m. till 9:40 p.m. by WWF Malaysia and Roots and Shoots Malaysia. So this session will be talking about actions of Malaysians and entities on the ground protecting Malaysia's nature, which draws from experiences and also key lessons that they've learned while they are practicing out their passion. Herewith, last but not least, I'd like to say thank you once again to all. And how about a quick wave to everyone just to bid adieu.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Paul, especially. Great session.
Thank you, everyone. It's really great to meet
Bye.
you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Yeah, absolutely. Take care. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Really great.